They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I say it's a dress best shown on a runway. My name is Clara Vance, and for 10 years, I lived as a ghost in my own life, haunted by the memory of my parents and suffocated by the man who was supposed to be my savior. He stole my past, he tried to steal my future, and he did it all with a condescending smile. Little did he know, I keep receipts, and my receipts aren't on paper. They're stitched into silk, embroidered in defiance, and designed to be seen by the entire world. So, before we get into it, do me a favor. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for your own story against someone determined to erase it. Trust me, what's coming might just be the inspiration you need. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The night my world burned down, and a monster rose from the ashes to take me in. Picture this, Milan. Not the tourist Milan, with its crowded piazzas and selfie sticks. I'm talking about the real Milan. The one that lives in the hushed, hallowed halls of historical ateliers and the cutthroat boardrooms of global fashion houses. My parents, Ilara and Julian Vance, were legends in that world. They weren't just designers, they were architects of fantasy. Their brand, Vance Atelier, was synonymous with avant-garde, almost magical couture. They could make fabric defy gravity and tell epic poems with a single seam. And I was their daughter. I grew up with the scent of raw silk and ozone from the sewing machines. My lullabies were the hum of my mother's sketching pencil and the rhythmic snip of my father's shears. They were my entire world. And then, when I was 17, that world turned to ash. A fire. A horrible, fast-moving fire at their main studio. The official report called it faulty wiring. An accident. A tragedy that orphaned me in a single night and turned my vibrant, colorful world into monochrome grief. The only person I had left was my mother's brother, my uncle, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the complete opposite of my parents. Where they were passionate, chaotic artists, Marcus was cold, polished steel. He was the director of the Thorne Foundation, a prestigious and incredibly wealthy institution dedicated to preserving classical art. To him, fashion was a frivolous commercial trade. My parents' work, a curious, if not slightly vulgar, anomaly that he tolerated because of family ties. He took me in, of course. It was the proper thing to do. He moved me into his sprawling, sterile apartment that felt more like a museum than a home. He became the trustee of my inheritance, the Vance Atelier brand, the archives, my parents' fortune, all locked away for my own good until I was mature enough. Mature enough. Funny, isn't it? For the next 10 years, I tried to follow in my parents' footsteps. I studied design at the best academy in Milan. But every step I took, Marcus was there, a shadow at my shoulder. My designs were too loud. My concepts were unrefined. My vision was a pale imitation of my mother's. He'd hold up one of my sketches, a modern, asymmetrical dress, and sneer. "Clara, my dear, your mother understood elegance. She understood form. This is just noise. You're trying so hard to be an artist, you've forgotten how to be a craftsman." Each critique was a paper cut. Small, insignificant on its own, but over a decade you bleed out. I started to believe him. I started to see my own work through his dismissive eyes. My passion became a source of shame. And so, we arrive at the night of the annual Thorne Foundation Gala. The biggest, most exclusive event on the Milan social calendar. I was 27. 4 weeks, I'd been preparing a gift for him. A peace offering. A desperate attempt to finally bridge the gap between his world of classical art and my world of forward-thinking design. I had spent a small fortune, a significant chunk of my personal allowance that he so graciously provided from my own money to acquire a lost treasure. The original, hand-bound sketchbook of a legendary 1920s couturier, one he'd spoken of with reverence. In my naive fantasy, this gift would show him I respected his world, that I understood history, that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the ungrateful, tasteless disappointment he saw me as. I was so stupid. The gala was a sea of black ties and $1,000 gowns. I felt like a fraud in my own design, a simple but elegant deep blue silk dress. I found Marcus holding court by the champagne fountain, surrounded by wealthy donors and art critics. "Uncle," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I held out the carefully wrapped gift. I got this for you, as a thank you, for everything." He took it with a distracted air, like a king accepting a peasant's tribute. "Clara, how thoughtful." He didn't even unwrap it. He just handed it off to his assistant without a second glance, and turned back to his conversation about a 17th century sculpture. The dismissal was a familiar ache. I should have been used to it, but that night, it felt sharper. I retreated to the edge of the ballroom, nursing a glass of Prosecco and trying to become invisible. An hour later, Marcus took the stage. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight hit the podium. "Friends, patrons, lovers of true beauty," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Tonight, we celebrate legacy, the enduring power of art that transcends fleeting trends." He spoke for 10 minutes about the foundation, about his vision, about tradition. Then, his voice grew somber. "As many of you know, 10 years ago my family suffered a great loss. My brilliant sister, Clara Vance, was taken from us. While the world of fashion remembers her for her commercial successes, I knew the true artist beneath. An artist I guided, I nurtured. My blood went cold. What was he doing? She was a raw talent, but it was I who helped her refine her vision," he continued, a look of faux modesty on his face. "I helped her see beyond mere clothing and into the realm of true art." He gestured to the side of the stage. 2 assistants wheeled out a mannequin, and on it was the starlight gown. My breath caught in my throat. It was my mother's masterpiece, her most iconic creation, a cascading dress of midnight blue silk, embroidered with thousands of tiny, shimmering crystals that looked like a captured galaxy. It was the only one of her major works to survive the fire kept in the Foundation's climate-controlled archive. It was the one piece of her soul I thought I had left. "This piece," Marcus announced, his hand resting on the mannequin's shoulder, which the press so crudely dubbed the Starlight Gown, was a collaboration. Her hands, perhaps, but my vision. It represents the pinnacle of what we achieved together. The room was filled with gasps and murmurs of admiration. My heart was pounding in my ears, a frantic, trapped bird. He wasn't just taking credit, he was erasing her. And then came the final, devastating blow. "And so," Marcus said with a magnanimous smile, "in the spirit of sharing true beauty with the world, the Thorne Foundation will be auctioning this singular piece tonight. Bidding will start at $500,000. I didn't even realize I dropped my glass. All I could see was my mother's legacy, my last tangible connection to her, being sold off like a piece of property, its story rewritten, its soul stolen by the man who was supposed to protect it. He wasn't just my uncle. He was a thief, a grave robber in a tuxedo. And in that moment, the 10 years of quiet grief and self-doubt inside me didn't just break. It caught fire. I don't remember leaving the gala. It's a blur of shocked faces, the auctioneer's rising voice, and the cold Milan air hitting my face like a slap. I walked for hours, the sound of my heels on the cobblestones the only proof I was still moving. By the time I got back to the mausoleum Marcus called a home, it was almost dawn. The next morning, the fallout began. The fashion blogs were on fire. Marcus Thorne, the secret genius behind Vance Atelier, one headline screamed. He had rewritten history overnight. When I confronted him, his calm was more terrifying than any rage. "Clara, this is for the best. Your mother's work deserves to be seen as high art, not as last season's trend. I have elevated her. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" My voice cracked. "You erased her. You stole her name." "I saved her name from obscurity," he said, his voice dropping to that familiar, chillingly calm tone. "And I suggest you remember your place. You live under my roof. You exist on my generosity. Do not challenge me. You will lose." He was right. In the weeks that followed, I was systematically exiled. A planned collaboration with a major fabric house was suddenly postponed indefinitely. A magazine feature on my emerging work was cancelled. Doors that had once been open were now firmly, silently shut. Marcus's influence was a poison that spread through the entire industry. I was no longer Clara Vance, promising young designer. I was the ungrateful, unstable niece. A liability. I packed a single bag and left his apartment. I had some savings, but not much. For a month, I drifted, sleeping on a friend's couch, feeling the fight drain out of me. He had won. He'd taken my parents, my inheritance, my mother's legacy, and now my future. I was completely and utterly broken. That's when Julian found me. Julian Croft was a fashion journalist, notorious for his venomous reviews and his uncanny ability to unearth secrets. He found me nursing a cheap coffee in a cafe, looking like a ghost. "Clara Vance," he said, sliding into the booth opposite me. He wasn't handsome in a classic way, but sharp, with intelligent, cynical eyes that saw everything. "You look like hell." "Go away, Julian. I'm not in the mood to be your next hit piece," I mumbled. He smirked. "Oh, I'm not here for a hit piece on you. I'm here for one on your uncle." He leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. "I never bought the secret genius story. Marcus Thorne has the artistic taste of a hedge fund manager. But a man who so publicly rewrites his dead sister's legacy, that man is hiding something. And I want to know what it is." For the first time in weeks, a flicker of something ignited inside me. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering a weapon. So, I told him everything. The years of belittling comments, the control, the feeling that something was always wrong. He listened, not with sympathy, but with the focused intensity of a predator catching a scent. "This isn't just about a dress, is it?" he said when I was done. "It's about the whole damn thing. The fire, the inheritance, everything." He handed me his card. "When you're ready to fight back, call me. In the meantime, disappear. Rebuild. Get strong. I'll start digging." His words were the spark I needed. I found a small, forgotten workshop for rent in the Navigli district, a grittier part of Milan known for its canals and artisans. It was dusty, cramped and perfect. It was a place Marcus would never think to look. There, surrounded by bolts of cheap fabric and a second-hand sewing machine, I began to work. But this time, I wasn't trying to please him. I wasn't trying to live up to my mother. I was designing from the anger, the grief, the betrayal. My designs became my diary. Sharp angles, raw edges, fabrics that looked like they'd been burned and brought back to life. I was forging my own armor one stitch at a time. One night, while cleaning out an old steamer trunk of my parents' things that Marcus had dismissively stored in the building's basement, my hand brushed against a loose piece of lining at the bottom. Curious, I pulled at it. It came away, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. My mother's private journal. And tucked within its pages were documents. Old legal papers, preliminary financial statements for the estate, letters between her and her lawyer. I stayed up all night, reading under the light of a single bare bulb, my hand shaking. The story they told was horrifying. The journal detailed Marcus's increasing jealousy of their success. It spoke of his loans that were never repaid. It mentioned his advice to invest in shell companies that mysteriously folded. The documents were even worse. They were the initial valuations of Vance Atelier, and they were worth 10 times what Marcus had claimed when he'd set up the trust. He hadn't just mismanaged my inheritance. He had systematically plundered it. He had bled the company dry from the inside for years, long before the fire. And then, the final entry in the journal, dated the day before the fire. Marcus was here today, my mother wrote. He was furious about the new collection. Said we were getting too big, too independent. He talked about the insurance policy on the studio. There was a look in his eye, Julian, a coldness. "I'm scared. I think he's capable of anything." The wiring wasn't faulty. The fire wasn't an accident. It was an opportunity. I sat there on the cold floor of my workshop, the sun rising over Milan, and I finally understood. He hadn't just erased my mother's legacy. He was a monster who had likely orchestrated her death and then built his own kingdom on the ashes of her life's work. The grief was a physical blow, but underneath it, something new and hard and sharp was being forged. This was no longer about a dress. It was about justice, and I was going to be the one to deliver it. With the truth burning in my gut, my work took on a new, ferocious intensity. I wasn't just designing clothes anymore. I was weaving evidence into fabric. I started a new, anonymous brand, posting my work only on a private, encrypted social media account. I called it Phoenix. Julian, true to his word, became my secret weapon. He used his connections to subtly amplify my posts, getting them in front of influential stylists and underground fashion critics. He'd text me morsels of information he dug up, Found the shell corp your mother mentioned. Traces back to a holding company in the Caymans, owned by the Thorne Foundation. Or, chatted with the fire marshal who signed off on your parents' case. He retired a very rich man 6 months later. Each piece of information became a design element. I used embroidery that mimicked the swirling signatures on the fraudulent legal documents. I developed a printing technique that made luxurious silk look like charred, peeling wallpaper. My collection was a silent, wearable indictment. And people started to notice. "Who is Phoenix?" the whispers began. "This work is raw, powerful, unlike anything else." My first real confrontation with Marcus happened 6 months later. I was at a high-end fabric supplier in Como, haggling for a bolt of experimental silk metal blend under a false name. And then he was just there, standing a few feet away, looking at me with cold recognition. "Clara," he said, the word dripping with disdain. "I heard you were slumming it, but this is a new low. Playing with scraps in some back alley workshop." I met his gaze, my heart hammering, but my voice was steady. "It's more honest work than polishing stolen trophies, uncle." His eyes narrowed. A flicker of genuine anger broke through his mask of composure. "You're playing with fire, little girl. A game you are not equipped to win." I gave him a small, cold smile. "I learned from the best." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there amidst the vibrant bolts of silk. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The fear he had cultivated in me for a decade was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. That encounter made him nervous. Julian told me Marcus had started putting feelers out, trying to discover who was behind Phoenix. The threat was getting closer. We needed to escalate. Julian introduced me to his Legion of the Spurned, a small, secret network of artists, photographers, and writers who had all been burned by Marcus Thorne. A photographer whose work he'd stolen for a foundation campaign. A curator he'd blackballed for questioning his acquisitions. They saw my story as their story. They saw a chance for collective payback. They became my army. The photographer helped me shoot a stunning, guerrilla-style lookbook in the dead of night. The writers helped craft a press release that was a masterpiece of innuendo. The curator used her connections to get me a slot. A secret, unsanctioned, pop-up show during Milan Fashion Week. It was incredibly risky. If we were discovered, we'd be shut down and publicly shamed. Our venue was an abandoned subway station. The night of the show, the air was electric with nervous energy. The Legion had spread the word through secret channels. The right people showed up. The influential editors, the daring stylists, the critics who were bored with the mainstream. There was no fancy runway. The models walked along the derelict platform, illuminated by the harsh, flickering station lights. The collection was only 10 pieces, but each one told a part of the story. The anger, the loss, the resilience. The final piece was a jacket made of black, iridescent fabric that shimmered like an oil slick, with the word Phoenix embroidered on the back in fiery, golden thread. It was a sensation. The next morning, the entire industry was talking. "Phoenix rises from the ashes of Fashion Week," one headline read. My anonymity made the story even more compelling. I was the talk of the town, and Marcus knew it was me. Julian sent me a screenshot of a text from one of his sources inside the Thorne Foundation. It was from Marcus. "Find her. Shut it down. Now." I had his attention. I had the momentum. And I had a plan for my final act. The venue was already chosen. The date was already set. Exactly 1 year after he tried to erase me, I was coming back to the Thorne Foundation Gala. Not as a guest, but as the main event. The year leading up to the next gala was a masterclass in covert operations. While the world knew Phoenix as a mysterious new force in fashion, I, Clara Vance, remained a ghost. The Legion and I worked in secret, funded by a silent investor Julian had found, a rival collector who hated Marcus with a passion. We built the collection piece by piece. Each design was a narrative bombshell. One dress, the embezzlement, was made of fabric printed with the faint, overlapping text of the bank statements from the Cayman Islands. Another, the gaslight gown, was crafted from a thermochromic material that changed from a pure, innocent white to a sickly, bruised purple with the heat of the wearer's body. Each piece was beautiful on its own, but together they were a confession. The plan was audacious. We hacked the gala's lighting and sound systems. My models, a mix of professionals and other artists wronged by Marcus, were disguised as catering staff and guests. Julian had prepared a digital press kit, a bombshell article containing scans of my mother's journal, the financial documents, the fire marshal's suspicious bank records, ready to be emailed to every major news outlet and blogger in the world at the exact right moment. The night of the gala arrived. From a van parked a block away, I watched the live security feed on a monitor, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Julian sat beside me, his fingers poised over his laptop. "You ready for this, Phoenix?" he asked, his usual cynicism replaced by a tense excitement. I took a deep breath, looking at my own reflection in the dark screen. I was wearing the final piece of the collection, my version of a starlight gown. I'd recreated it, not in my mother's midnight blue, but in a blazing, defiant crimson. The crystals weren't silver, they were sharp, jet black hematite, like hardened tears. It wasn't a tribute, it was a declaration of war. "He started this fire," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'm just here to make sure he burns in it." Inside the gala, Marcus took the stage, preening in the spotlight. "1 year ago," he began, "we celebrated the elevation of legacy." "Showtime," I whispered into my headset. My contact on the inside, a sound technician Marcus had fired years ago, hit the switch. Every light in the ballroom except for a single, harsh spotlight on the main entrance, went black. The sound system cut out, replaced by a low, pulsing beat, the sound of a heartbeat. A gasp went through the crowd. Marcus stood on stage, confused and sputtering. And then, the first model walked into the spotlight. She wore the charred silk, a dress that looked like it had been pulled from a fire. The heartbeat on the sound system grew faster. One by one, they came. Each model walking slowly, deliberately, down the center of the ballroom, their path illuminated by our hacked spotlights. The crowd was frozen, mesmerized by the illicit, powerful spectacle. On the massive screens behind the stage, where a loop of classical art was supposed to be playing, our photographers' haunting images of the collection began to flash, intercut with redacted legal documents. People started murmuring, pulling out their phones. They were beginning to understand. This wasn't a performance. It was an accusation. Back in the van, Julian's phone buzzed. "He's calling security. We have maybe 90 seconds left." "Send it," I commanded. Julian hit enter. "The birds have flown," he said with a grim smile. Across the ballroom, hundreds of phones began to buzz and chime in unison as Julian's expose hit their inboxes. The headline was simple and brutal. "The Thorne Legacy, a decade of lies, theft, and a very convenient fire." As the last model, wearing the thermochromic gaslight gown, which had now turned a deep, angry purple, reached the stage, the music cut. I took my final breath and stepped out of the van. I walked through the service entrance, my crimson dress flowing behind me. I entered the ballroom just as the crowd's murmurs turned into a roar of shock and outrage. They were reading the article. They were seeing the proof. I walked down the makeshift runway, my eyes locked on Marcus. He saw me, and for the first time in his life, the mask of cool composure shattered completely. His face was a canvas of pure, undiluted horror. He looked from me, to the dress, to the screens displaying his crimes, to the faces of his patrons staring at him with contempt. I stopped at the foot of the stage and just looked up at him. I didn't need to say a word. The clothes had said it all. The evidence had said it all. The aftermath was a firestorm. Marcus Thorne was ruined. Utterly. The foundation collapsed under the weight of scandal and investor lawsuits. He was arrested, and the investigation into my parents' death was reopened. He lost everything. His money, his reputation, his freedom. He was erased, just as he had tried to erase me. As for me, Phoenix became the most talked about name in fashion. But I didn't want to be an anonymous mystery anymore. I reclaimed my name, Clara Vance. I reopened Vance Atelier, not as a monument to the past, but as a living, breathing testament to resilience. My new studio is bright, filled with light, and overlooks a garden. I finally got my inheritance back, what was left of it, and used it to create a new foundation. The Vance Fund, dedicated to helping young, independent designers who have been shut out by the industry gatekeepers. Julian is on the board, of course. His hit piece won him a major journalism award. Turns out, sometimes cynicism and justice can hold hands. Sometimes I stand in my studio, surrounded by my own designs, and I think about that crimson dress. It wasn't a dress made for a gala. It was a suit of armor I forged in the dark. I didn't need my uncle's approval, or the world's permission. I just needed to reclaim my own story, and I did it with a needle and thread. The truth is, the most beautiful things are often born from the deepest pain. We all have the power to take the broken pieces of our lives and stitch them back together into something stronger, something more authentically us. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ashes? I would be honored to read your stories of resilience in the comments below. If this story spoke to you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about turning pain into power. Share it with anyone who needs a reminder that they are the true author of their own life story. Thank you for listening. And remember, never let anyone else tell you who you are. Your legacy is yours to design.